All right, let's jump right in today. We're tackling sexual exploitation in the workplace, and it's a tough one, but super important, right?
Absolutely.
We're using Yousif Bshir's book, Breaking the Chains, as our guide.
Great book.
Yeah, it's a deep dive for our listeners, kind of like a crash course on not just what exploitation is, but, how it messes people up, the legal stuff around it, and the big thing, how to actually build a safer future. Bshir lays out some real-world stories, strategies. It's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, that first chapter really grabbed me, the way Bashir goes beyond just calling out bad behavior.
Yeah.
He goes right to the heart of it, how exploitation is about dominance.
Oh, it feels like
Turning your job into a battleground where your career, your sense of self, it's all at stake.
it's not just someone being a jerk. It's almost like a whole system of control. Is that what he's saying?
Exactly. And what's so tricky is it can show up in ways we don't always see.
Like what? Give me an example.
It's not always that blatant sleep with me or you're fired thing, though obviously that's horrific. Right.
But it can be all these little things that build up
Oh, I see.
a hostile environment, like a constant stream of comments, or unwanted touching disguised as friendly,
Yeah.
or constantly being passed over for opportunity.
Wears you down.
It does. It chips away at your safety, your dignity over time. It can be subtle, but it's still so damaging.
Yeah.
The book talks about the impact on victims, and whew, it's tough to read some of those stories.
Yeah, it doesn't pull any punches. What was one that really stuck with you?
There's one about Anna. She was this brilliant engineer, but after months of enduring harassment, her anxiety was so bad she couldn't even sit in a meeting without having a panic attack.
Oh, wow.
It just shows the lasting scars, We're like anxiety, depression, PTSD. Some people even become so afraid they can't function in any workplace after that.
It's awful. And it makes you wonder, how common Anna is this, really? Like, has Manwai Workplace ever had those subtle signs, even if nothing big has happened? Bashir talks about root causes, not just individual bad apples.
Right.
Exactly. He says it's about the whole orchard we need to look at. Power imbalances, cultural norms that just let this stuff slide,
Oh, yeah.
and systems that fail to protect people who are vulnerable.
I see.
It's like all these things come together.
Well, then unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
What kind of power imbalances are we talking about specifically? That's a pretty broad term.
Well, think about it. It could be a huge pay gap between men and women, or a lack of diversity in leadership roles.
Right.
Even just a culture where if you speak up, you're seen as a troublemaker.
Yeah. Been there.
And when you combine that with, like, a culture where inappropriate jokes are just brushed off, boys will be boys kind of thing,
That's the worst.
and then add in a lack of clear ways to report these things, that's the breeding ground right there.
Oh, I see. So it's not just that one person is a creep. It's like the whole environment makes it?
Permissive. That's the word Bashir uses. And then there's this even scarier part, the stigma and the victim blaming.
Right. It's like even bringing it up makes you the problem.
Exactly. And think about it when victims are afraid to talk because they'll be blamed or shamed. Not only does it hurt them, but it silences other people who might be suffering too.
That's messed up.
It is. And who benefits from that silence? The abuser. The cycle just keeps going.
It makes you think twice about your own workplace. Are there any red flags WE should be watching out for, even subtle ones?
Absolutely. Lack of diversity is a big one, or that tolerance for boys will be boys stuff we talked about, or just a general reluctance to talk about anything uncomfortable, even if it's important.
Like sweeping it under the rug.
Right. It's like ignoring cracks in your foundation eventually.
The whole thing crumbles.
Exactly. Okay, so let's say we DOC those red flags. What then? Well, Bashir dives into the legal stuff because this IS against the law, right? But how effective are those laws, really?
That's the question, isn't it? The laws are great, but if they don't, actually,
Protect people.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Well, globally, laws DO exist, which is good. The problem is enforcement is tricky.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Put yourself in those shoes. You're being harassed by your boss S, someone with power over your job, your income. Would you speak up easily?
Honestly, I'm not sure I would. I'd be terrified of being fired or not believed.
Right. And retaliation is a real fear, too. So even if someone does report it, proving these cases is so hard. These situations are nuanced. There may not be witnesses.
And the legal system is
Slow.
It's like slow, expensive.
And sometimes just ineffective. It's disheartening for victims seeking justice, that's for sure.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? If the laws are kind of iffy, do we just give up?
Definitely not. Bashir makes it clear those laws are still vital.
Okay.
They set a standard, and there are cases where they've worked. But knowing your rights is huge, even if nothing's happened to you yet.
Right.
Knowing about company policies, legal options, support systems, it can make you feel more empowered,
Yeah.
prepared.
Like you're not going in blind. Okay, I like that. Knowledge as protection.
Exactly. And the book also tells some amazing stories of people who fought back, which is so inspiring.
Oh, yeah, those are powerful. I remember Sarah's story.
Yeah, she was being targeted by this high-up executive,
Right.
but thankfully, she was smart. She documented everything. Emails, messages, dates, times. Like she was building a case file before anything even fully went down.
Yeah, it's sad that it's necessary, but also smart.
It is sad, but it's the reality a lot of people face.
Mhm.
The good news is Sarah's company had that zero tolerance policy.
Okay, good.
They took her seriously, investigated it properly, and boom, that exec was fired. But here's the best part.
What's that?
Sarah's company didn't just stop there. They used what happened to actually improve their policies, create better support for everyone. So Sarah getting justice led to a ripple effect of positive change.
That's incredible. And there were other stories like that, right? Not just individual wins, but like changing the whole system.
There's Lisa's story, too. She'd actually witnessed exploitation when she worked for someone else.
Uh-oh.
And it affected her so much that when she started her own small business,
Yeah.
she built it differently. Strong policies right from day one, diverse leadership, open communication, like exploitation-proof by design.
I love that. So these stories aren't just floofs. They're showing us.
What's possible?
Exactly. They're showing us that both taking individual action and having proactive leaders,
It makes a difference.
it can actually shift things for the better.
100%. It's not enough to just react when things go wrong. We have to be building the right kind of workplace from the ground up. It's like, when you're building a house, you can't just slap on some new paint and call it a day.
Right.
You need a solid foundation, the support beams, good quality materials,
Right.
to make something that'll actually last.
I love that analogy.
Mm.
And speaking of foundations, the book really gets into the nitty-gritty of it all. Those anti-exploitation policies, the ones that actually work.
Yeah, policies are essential.
Like what makes the difference between just words on paper and something that actually makes a difference?
Well, Bashir's point is they can't just be vague, They need to be crystal clear, comprehensive, and the company has to actually enforce them. That's huge.
Enforce them. Yeah, that makes
Or
sense.
just as important, there needs to be a way for people to report incidents, and to actually get support if something happens.
Okay, so break it down for me. What does a really good policy look like in practice?
So first off, you need those super clear definitions. What exactly is unacceptable behavior?
No gray areas.
None. No room for, I thought they meant. Everyone in the company, from the top down, needs to know what's off limits.
Yeah.
And it has to be backed up by that zero tolerance stance.
Okay, zero tolerance.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
strong, right? Like we are not playing around with this.
Exactly. It sends a message that it doesn't matter who you are, exploitation is never acceptable. And when it comes to reporting, Bashir's big on having multiple ways to do it,
Okay.
including anonymous options.
Oh, that's interesting. Why anonymous?
Think about it. If you're scared of retaliation or, just generally terrified to speak up, having that confidential channel can be a game changer.
That's a good point. If I were in that situation, I think I'd be way more likely to report something if I knew I could do it anonymously.
Exactly. Okay, but what about the consequences, right? If someone is found guilty of exploitation, what then?
Is it just a slap on the wrist, or are we talking real repercussions?
This is where the book is very clear. You gotta have clear consequences, and not just for the individual who did it.
Oh, interesting. Explain that.
Bashir's argument is the company itself has to be held accountable too.
How do you mean?
Well, they allowed a culture where this could happen, right? So that might mean reviewing all their policies.
Okay.
Maybe more training, maybe even changing the power structure within the company.
So it's about fixing the system, not just blaming one person. It's not like we fired that one bad guy, problem solved kind of thing.
Nope, it's got to be holistic. Systemic change, that's the key. And that takes time, effort, and leaders who are actually committed to doing it right.
Have you ever worked somewhere with that kind of leader? Someone who really walks the walk when it comes to this stuff. I'm trying to think, and yikes, not really.
I have, and let me tell you, it's night and day. When the leadership actually cares about respect, about equality, about safety,
Yeah.
it creates this ripple effect through the whole company.
I can imagine.
People feel safe speaking up, they know they'll be taken seriously, and it sets the tone that this behavior just won't fly.
Okay, but that kind of leadership feels rare.
It can be, yeah.
Maybe I've just had bad luck with bosses, but anyway, so we've got a good leader, strong policies, ways to report things, Ain't that enough?
Right?
What about actually giving people the skills to deal with all this?
Training. That's the missing piece.
Training. I can already picture those cheesy videos and boring PowerPoints.
No, no, Bashir's clear. The training has to be good. Engaging, interactive, maybe even role-playing to make it real.
Role-playing? I don't know. I always feel kind of awkward in those.
Yeah, but sometimes awkward is what makes it stick with you, right? Remember it later.
True, true. What else does he say about training?
Keep it practical. Give people real-life scenarios. Teach them how to actually talk about these issues.
Oh, like how to have those conversations that everyone avoids.
Yep. How to handle reports sensitively, how to support a colleague who's going through something awful.
So it's about actually giving people the tools to do something, not just, here's the rule book, good luck.
Exactly. But, even with all that in place, things can still go wrong. Think about how fast rumors spread.
Oh, tell me about it. Especially online, it's like wildfire.
And with something this sensitive, misinformation can be as damaging as the exploitation itself.
Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it like that.
So Bashir's got a whole section on managing rumors. Be proactive, monitor what people are saying, have a way to fact-check things.
So you're not just reacting emotionally, you're actually
Getting the truth, and then communicate clearly, regularly, so people aren't left in the dark and freaking out.
It's like that whole rumors thrive in a vacuum thing.
Yep. So how about you? What are some red flags you do look for if you're trying to figure out if info is reliable, especially about something like this?
Good question. I think for me, anonymous sources are a big one. If someone's making serious accusations, but they won't put their name on it.
Shady.
Super shady.
Mm-hmm.
Also, anything that feels really emotionally charged, like they're trying to manipulate me with outrage.
Yeah, you got to step back and ask yourself, is this credible? Is the source reliable? And does it actually line up with what I already know?
That's good advice for, like, life in general these days, honestly.
Yes. But okay, let's say the info I asked, legit, something bad did happen. How do you address it without making things worse?
That feels tricky.
Like walking on eggshells.
A bit. Bashir's all about transparency. Organizations need a plan, a way to communicate about this stuff.
So don't try to pretend it didn't happen.
No, be upfront. This is what's happening. Here's what we're doing, and here's where you can get support.
Almost like you're acknowledging the elephant in the room. Exactly. And that builds trust, right? Shows you're not afraid to tackle tough stuff and that you're committed to making things right.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those situations where an incident's been reported and now you need a full-on investigation?
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other beast.
Right. How do you even approach that fairly?
Investigations are tough, but necessary. Bashir's got a really detailed process he lays out.
Okay, give me the highlights. What makes an investigation good in this context?
Speed is huge. No sweeping it under the rug. No waiting to see if it blows over. Take it seriously right away.
Right.
Then evidence gathering. Talk to everyone involved. Review documents, emails, whatever it takes to get the full picture.
So you're not just trying to find the guilty party. You're trying to understand.
The whole context. Why did this happen? Were there things that made it more likely? What needs to change to prevent it happening again?
It's almost like you're a detective, but instead of solving a crime, you're trying to stop future ones.
Yep. But objectivity is key, too. You can't go in assuming you know what happened.
Right. Everyone deserves a fair shot.
Exactly. Both the person who reported it and the person being accused, they deserve a process that's unbiased.
That's tough, I bet. It must be hard to balance all those competing.
It is. But for me, the most important thing Bashir emphasizes is this. Once the investigation's done, you need a plan.
Okay. A plan for what?
Action. It's not just about punishment. It's about fixing the harm that was done.
Oh, right.
Supporting the people who are hurt and putting things in place to prevent it happening again.
So moving forward in a way that's restorative, not just punitive.
Exactly. But let's be real. A lot of companies probably see this whole issue as a headache, It's something they got to do for PR.
Right. Avoid the bad press.
Yep. But Bashir lays out the economic argument, too, and it's compelling.
Oh, how so?
He shows in detail how much exploitation actually costs companies.
Financially.
Big time. Lawsuits, settlements, insurance premiums go up. The direct costs are bad enough. But then there's the stuff you can't measure as easily, like morale tanks, good people quit, productivity drops. It ripples outward.
So it's not just about doing the right thing morally. It's actually bad for business.
It is bad for business. So when companies realize that, it changes the conversation.
Okay, so we've covered what companies and leaders should do, but what about us as individuals? Even if we're not the boss, what can we do? Bashir talks about that empowerment piece, right?
He does. Everyone has a role to play in making workplaces safer. And it starts with being informed, knowing your rights,
Okay, that makes sense.
understanding company policies, what resources are available. It's knowledge as power. Again,
So if something does happen, you're not starting from scratch.
exactly. But it's also about action, even small things. If something feels off, speak up. Challenge those jokes, support your coworkers, push for better policies.
Yeah, but speaking up can be so scary. Retaliation is a real thing.
It is. The book has tips for navigating that, but one thing he hammers on is documentation.
Oh, good point.
If something happens, write it down. Save emails, keep a log, whatever. It might feel excessive, but that record can be huge.
Sounds like you're building your case just in case.
Exactly. Oh, and one more thing, self-care. This stuff is draining, whether you're the victim or just a witness.
Right. You can get burnt out fighting for everyone else.
The book's got a whole section on that. Take care of your mental health. Get support from friends, family, professionals, whatever you need to process this stuff.
That's huge. It's like putting on your own oxygen mask before helping others, right?
Right. You can't fight this fight if you're running on empty. And remember, you're not alone. There are resources out there. Hotlines, support groups, legal help, people who get it.
That's good to know. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. Bashir also talks about this problem on a global scale, right? It's not just one country or industry.
Nope, it's systemic, worldwide, and that's both scary and encouraging.
Scary, I get, but encouraging how?
Because people are fighting it everywhere. There are global movements, organizations, people dedicated to making things better.
It's like we're all in this together, even if we don't realize it.
We are. And while the challenges are huge, there are also inspiring success stories happening all over.
Oh, I want to hear about those.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked so much about the problems. It's good to remember that progress is happening.
Absolutely. And Breaking the Chains uses those stories to show us what's possible. It gives us a roadmap.
Okay, lead the way. Which one stood out to you?
So many good examples, it's hard to choose. But Sweden, their approach is just so thorough.
Yeah, we touched on it earlier, but give us the rundown. What makes them so good at tackling this stuff?
Okay, picture this. You've got clear laws that say harassment, exploitation, any of it, it's not okay. And if you do it, there are serious consequences.
Makes sense.
But here's the thing. It's not just about punishing people after the fact. Sweden also puts a ton of resources into supporting victims.
Support like what? Give me specifics.
Free legal aid so you don't have to be rich to get justice. Counseling services to help people deal with the trauma, rebuild their lives. They're attacking it from both sides.
Right.
Preventing it, A&D, helping people heal.
So they're not just trying to catch the bad guys. It's about making the whole environment safer.
Exactly. And the data shows it's working. Sweden's always up there in those global rankings for gender equality, workplace safety, and they've seen a real drop in the number of exploitation cases being reported. It's proof that when a whole society says, enough is enough, things can change.
That's a powerful example. But Sweden's a small country, pretty homogenous, right?
Right.
Does something like that work on a bigger, more diverse scale?
Well, that's where something like the hashtag #MeToo movement is so amazing. It started in the US, but it's had this global impact. It's changed the conversation. And for a lot of survivors, it was like, finally, someone's listening.
I remember when those stories started coming out online.
Yeah.
So many people sharing their experiences. It was heartbreaking, but also there was this sense of, like a dam had broken and all this stuff that had been hidden for so long was finally
Out in the open. Exactly. It forced people to pay attention. And it's led to real change, too.
Give me some examples. What kind of changes have we seen because of hashtag #MeToo?
New laws specifically targeting these issues in several countries. Companies scrambling to update their policies, especially about reporting and support systems.
It put a lot of pressure on them.
It did. And we've seen a much greater willingness to hold people accountable, even if they're rich and powerful.
It feels like pre-#MeToo, there were certain people who were just untouchable.
And now, not so much.
That's huge.
It is. But even more importantly, hashtag #MeToo created a space where survivors could feel believed, supported. It challenged that whole victim-blaming thing that kept people silent for years.
Like it gave people permission to say, this happened to me and it wasn't my fault.
Exactly. Powerful stuff.
Okay, so we've got Sweden with their system-wide approach, hashtag #MeToo shaking things up globally. Any other bright spots we should know about?
Australia's national inquiry into workplace harassment is a really interesting one. They basically said, instead of waiting for a crisis, let's investigate this proactively.
Oh, that's smart. So they weren't just putting out fires, they were...
Trying to figure out how to prevent them altogether.
I like that. What do they do?
Talk to experts, gather tons of data, but most importantly, they listen to survivors. Hundreds of people shared their stories, and that formed the basis of their recommendations.
Wow, so it was really driven by the people who had actually...
Experienced it firsthand, and those recommendations led to real change. New laws, more funding for support services, and a real focus on prevention, not just punishment.
Okay, so we've got Sweden, #MeToo, Australia. 3 very different approaches, but all successful. What's the key takeaway for our listeners here? What ties them all together?
It's that multi-pronged approach, I think. You can't just do one thing and expect it to fix everything.
Right, right. So break that down for me. What does multi-pronged actually look like in a company or a community?
Well, you need strong laws. That's the base. Then, clear policies within organizations, ways for people to report safely,
Okay. Yeah.
and then real support systems so people aren't just left to fend for themselves after something bad happens, but also ongoing education, training, so people know what to do before it gets to that point.
It's like awareness and action happening on all these different levels.
Exactly. And maybe the most important thing is a culture that truly values respect and equality. Because if you don't have that, everything else is just window dressing.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Right. And this isn't a one and done deal either. This requires constant vigilance, a willingness to learn and do better because things change, new challenges pop up.
So we got to be adaptable.
We do. But the good news is Bashir's book really gives us a toolkit, you know? It shows us what works so we're not just fumbling around in the dark.
And that's what this deep dive is all about, right?
Yeah.
Giving people information, resources, hope. So as we wrap up, I want to thank you, our listener, for being here with us. This has been a heavy topic, but we can't shy away from these conversations. And remember, this isn't just about listening. It's about doing something.
What's one small thing you can do this week to make a difference? Maybe talk to a friend about what we discussed, or see if your company's policies actually hold up.
Yeah, or maybe it's something even smaller, like calling out that joke that makes you uncomfortable or standing up for a coworker who's being treated unfairly.
Whatever it is, remember, even small actions create ripples. And when enough of us do that, we can actually shift the tide.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Keep fighting the good fight.